Okay, so what I wanted to do here was to actually talk through my architectural plans. This is something that I haven't seen many people go through. It's a really important part of building an ADU, sort of getting comfortable with your plans, obviously submitting them to the city, and then when you start building the ADU, you really need to know the ins and outs of these plans. And I'll be honest, when I first started out, I didn't really understand the plans very well. Certainly a lot of the engineering details I didn't understand at all. But as you get into it, it's your job as the owner builder to really understand the plans, to make sure that everyone's following the plans, to realize where there may be some issues with the plans, or maybe you need to change some of the ways you're doing things, or get revisions, or identify discrepancies between the architectural plans and the engineered plans, which in my case were a little bit different. And the engineered plans actually kind of supersede the architectural plans, but the engineer came in afterwards. And the way I did things, they didn't necessarily work closely together on the plan set. So that may be the same case for you. But I wanted to walk through these plans, show you the survey, a little bit of the Title 24, the engineered plans, and the inspection card that the city issued, to really give you an idea of what a plan set looks like and how it works. So these are the plans that I got back from the city. I've redacted some of the information here. I think most of the pages are in this slide set that I've got here, but there may be a few missing. But as you can see, Oakland have stamped it with these different checklists. It's been approved. They've put some special inspections required for the build. You can see here, so they want us to do concrete construction, special inspections, to make sure that the concrete is at least 3,000 psi, that there's reinforcement placed, that's all the rebar, and that the concrete is placed correctly. There's also structural wood inspection. So that's coming in, inspecting the nailing pattern, that kind of thing. And what special inspections mean in the case of Oakland is that you actually have to hire an engineering company to come in and inspect that work and sign off on it. And then the Oakland City inspectors want to see that sign off from the engineering firm. Of course, it adds a lot of extra cost and delay. You have to coordinate with an engineering company. You have to find an engineering company that's willing to take on a relatively small amount of work like this. And then, of course, they charge for their time, and they have sort of minimum call-out charges. I think it's in the budget, but I think I paid about $2,700 in total for special inspections. And these were just for people to come out, inspect the work, sign off. In the case of the concrete, they actually took a few samples of the concrete that they then send off to a lab to test for compressive strength to make sure that it's meeting that 3,000 psi requirement. So that's the special inspections here. You've got the location of the project, some basic information on the zoning. All of this stuff was put together by my architect. You can see it on the map. It's got the planning stamp here. You can see that they say revisions need approval. Thankfully, we didn't have to go back and get any revisions. It has the scope of work, so it's a tear down of an existing garage and rebuild of a new ADU with a full bathroom, full kitchen, new HVAC, new electrical meter, 100 amp service to the ADU. So that's the first page. And then you've got a list of all the sheets in the architectural plans here, and that it meets or is compliant with California code. So my architect did a really good job of putting all this together. The second page, you can see, gives an overview of the site, including an aerial view, which I think came from Google Maps or possibly some drone photos that I took. You can see the old garage here that we had to demolish. And this next page is the site plan. So you can see here is a category 1 ADU. So that is a detached ADU and conversion of an existing structure. You can see the main property here on the site plan. That of course is staying the same. We've got the driveway coming down here, the back garden. You've got the property lines marked out on this drawing and the approximate length of those lines. And you can see where the old garage was. This is a footprint here. And as you can see, it's on two property lines, the rear and the side. And you can see the proposed ADU. So it's a little bit larger. We increased the square footage for egress and ingress. You're allowed to do that up to 150 square foot. We added 110 square feet. So you can see that there. Essentially, we just made it a rectangle and slightly widened it to make it livable. 14 feet wide by about 44 feet. You can see there, 44 feet long. So that's pretty good dimensions. I think it works pretty well, like having lived in this ADU for a little bit now. But certainly if it was more narrow, it probably wouldn't have worked. So that's the overall site plan. This next page is showing the utilities. So this was something that I had to do a lot of sort of thinking about ahead of time before, in conversation with the architect. I really essentially told him what I wanted to do in terms of the sewer line, the electrical, and the water. So you can see it on here. First of all, let's talk about the sewer line. So we bought the main property in 2017, and the first thing we did was replace the sewer lateral. So I knew exactly what they did there. They did a trenchless sewer lateral replacement, and it runs down the driveway, loops around the back of the house to the other side of the house. There's a tie-in to the bathroom in the main house here. So what I was thinking was that we would just tap into that sewer line here, and the bathroom sort of in the middle of this rectangle in the ADU. So we'd have the sewer line running along here and then connecting to this sewer line here and then back out to the street. Of course, one of the things that I had to figure out in doing this was the depth of that sewer line and the elevation of the site and the proposed elevation of the ADU. Because ideally you want to have gravity drain the sewer line, and it needs to have an adequate slope. And that means that the lowest point is going to be at the street, and the highest point is going to be the sort of longest side of the sewer lateral. So right here is going to be the high point. So what I had to do was sort of measure the depth of the sewer line here to make sure that it was going to work with where the foundation was going to sit and where the sewer line was going to run to the bathroom in the ADU. And thankfully, it was, we had just about enough fall to make it work. So we didn't have to put in a sump pump, a sewer pump, which people have to do if they don't have adequate fall. And that, of course, requires an electrical connection. They're susceptible to failing. It's just a lot more complexity. So I'm very glad that we were able to make the sewer line work. And I'll talk more about that in the construction phase, because we actually ended up doing a lot of work around the sewer line. We had to get it inspected at the end. So that was a whole thing. So electrical, that was another thing that we needed to plan for. And so the existing house had only 100 amp service that was probably from the 1990s. Wasn't going to be enough to support an ADU as well as the main house, probably needed upgrading anyway. So the plan was to have the overhead come into the main house as it did already at the time, come in overhead across the street, and through an overhead weatherhead, come down into a hot gutter. So that's essentially a gutter that splits out that power line into two separate legs. And then one would be going to the main house, and it's like a combo meter and panel. and then there'd be another panel here that would then have a feeder that would run through the crawl space of the main house, and then under the patio here into the ADU, underground here into the ADU. So that was the plan for the electrical. And then the last thing here is the water. So I already knew that the main water came into the house here from the front and runs along the back. So I figured we would just continue that line under the patio to the ADU. We actually ended up changing this a little bit. It comes all the way down to here, around the back, around where the bathroom is, and then it comes up into the house and then into the walls. So we decided not to run that under the slab, just in case it leaks, for example, or there's any issues with it. It's all accessible from the yard via digging, and then in the walls of the ADU. So I think that's about it for this particular page. Yeah, let's move to the next page. So this is a little bit more of a detailed overhead of the existing structure and the proposed structure. It's flipped around a little bit. The orientation is different, but compared to this one. But you can see here, similar to the last drawing, we've got the existing garage. Sort of had this structure where it was a little bit narrower at the front and wider at the back. And then what we're proposing, which is to widen it a little bit and make it a rectangle, but keep it on the property lines here. So that is the layout for that. And now we're getting into the actual layout of the ADU. So this hopefully makes sense to you guys. What we have here is a living room, kitchen, open plan area, a bathroom in the middle, a little hallway that connects to the bedroom at the back. And we have a block wall along the two property lines here. That's this sort of shaded gray area. And then the darker gray is the framed walls. You can see the windows here. So we've got the bifold. We've got two windows here. We've got a French door, two more windows for the bedroom. The HVAC is going to be out here. We've got our kitchen here. So we've got a sink, stove. We've got a 36-inch fridge, full-size fridge. We've got a little island or peninsula area, and the dishwasher is in the peninsula. And then the bathroom, we have vanity, we have the toilet, we have a bathtub. This is a heat pump water heater in the bathroom here, and a washer dryer that's stacked. And we've got a pocket door here. You can see the sub panel here, 100 amp sub panel. And you can see here it's a little bit small, but 36 inches of clearance. So you need to be able to sort of stand in front of the panel with adequate space. So that's the sub panel there. And then in the bedroom, we have a closet. So you can see that here. What else have we got here? These are egress windows. The city have made some notations in red on the plans here about fire resistance, minimum of one window per sleeping room, so that's fine. We've got two big windows. Closet dimensions, water closet dimensions. So yeah, the toilet has to have adequate space either side of it and in front. That's California, that's code. I didn't have to provide a mechanical plan. So it says elect mech plumb not checked. That's pretty standard. What else do we have here? So this drawing below just has more of the dimensions called out here. And one of the detail here, actually, this dotted line across the back is actually a gutter. So what we have here, because the shed roof slopes downwards towards the property line, That's kind of based on the height that was existing at the property line, and wanting to raise the roof up into the middle of the lot. We have the gutter on the property line side. So that is right up against the property line, and the gutter comes along here and it drains to the front. So that's the setup there. A little bit atypical, but it was one of those things that I felt we needed to do in order to make it work with keeping it on these two property lines. And the city were fine with that. So this is now the electrical plan. So you can see here that we have light locations. We have outlets. These things are all outlets. We have outdoor outlets and outdoor lights. These dollar signs are light switches. These are also outlets. And we've got a ceiling fan in the bedroom. We've got more outlets. The panel, of course, is here. And we've got smoke detectors. So this is where it pays to have someone who's sort of built these kind of structures before, is familiar with code, to sort of plan this out. And frankly, you know, I walked through all of this with the electrician at a later date. We probably changed some of the locations for some of these. In many cases, we might have added more outlets, just as we began to get familiar with the space and how it was going to be used. But you know, this is a pretty comprehensive and good plan for the electrical, and you can see they didn't have any issues with that. Now this is looking at the sort of elevations and the outdoor external design. So you can see the shed roof here. You can see that it's a 312 pitch. That means for every foot of sort of horizontal direction, it sort of rises by 3 inches. So that is, I think, a borderline. That's sort of the lowest end that's acceptable for a shingle roof. And that leaves us with, I think that's 12 feet, 12 feet height at the tallest point. And then, of course, at the property line, it's a little bit shorter. So you can see the bifold door here. These are the property line sides where we have a brick wall, a CMU block wall. And so that was for fireproofing and durability. And although it caused a few issues with the construction, just in terms of complexity and trying to find people that could actually do that and understand the plans. Not many people are familiar with building block walls around here, surprisingly. But actually it's worked out really well from a sound insulation point of view. And, you know, I'm just happy that we won't really have to worry about anything happening on the sides that we can't access. So you can see the front view here. We've got the windows, we've got the French door, and we've got the slab here. So that's the outdoor sort of elevations. And now we're moving on to the actual concrete foundation. So you can see here that these are the architectural drawings. Actually, the engineered plans have a lot more detail around the concrete foundation and sort of override some of the details here. But you know, this is calling out a vapor barrier underneath the concrete. This is talking about the footings, and there's, you know, the CMU block wall. This one is actually looking at the roof, so it's got 212 slope. We're actually doing 312, so that's a little bit inconsistent. But it talks about the rafters here, but again, that's superseded by the engineered plans. If we go on to the next one, this is the window schedule. So this has the different windows that we have in the ADU. So they're three fives. So that's 3 foot wide, 5 foot tall, single hung. It's actually worth trying to find the windows you want to use, or talk with your architect. First of all, what I wanted to do was go with like relatively standard size windows that would be easily available and not too expensive. But I also wanted pretty nice windows that were large and would let in a lot of light. So I think my architect actually suggested this size of window. And then when you've found windows you like of that size, you can sort of fill in these U factors and other things about the windows if you have them. That's actually very important when it comes to the Title 24. So these are the windows we went with. The other thing that I wanted to make sure was going to be relatively cost effective was the bifold and French door, because I know those things can get incredibly expensive if you're doing custom ones, or wooden frame or anything like that. So I wanted to kind of identify the products I was going to use as we put these plans together. So again, these are relatively standard sizes for a French door and a bifold. And as you can see, the architect had put in Eris Home Products. I'd actually found these doors online. They're sold at Home Depot as well as directly, but I quite like the look of them. They're aluminium, and they were sort of Title 24 compliant and reasonably priced. And you can see that in the cost breakdown. I think that the bifold was something like 7,000, and the French door is about 2,000 to 3,000, which in the big scheme of things is pretty good. So that's the schedule, and then we got some interior door scheduling as well. So we've got a pocket door, we've got 2 swing doors, not too many interior doors because we've got the open plan living room, kitchen, of course. So this is like a cross-sectional view of the ADU. And this is where we start getting into a lot of the construction details. So first of all, starting with the foundation, you can see we have these footings here along the perimeter. That's essentially where the concrete's a bit thicker to give it that extra strength. And you can see that we were required to put some gravel underneath the concrete as well. And that's important to make sure that it's well supported and that's compacted to give a good stable base for your concrete so it doesn't crack or settle over time. We've got some call outs for the rebar here. Here again, this is superseded by the engineering plans that come a little bit later. I actually involved the engineer somewhat after I'd done the architectural plans because I wanted to be sure that these were going to get approved first of all. And so what else do we have here? We have the CMU block wall. You can see that here. These are 4-inch CMU blocks. We've got wall ties that tie the CMU block wall to the framing. We have a window here. We have our rafters, and you can see there's a little ventilation diagram here as well. So with this vaulted ceiling, we have to have airflow going through it to allow it to vent. As it gets hot, it's going to get very hot under the sun. So the airflow can come in up here through the soffit, and then we have these vents, and I'll show you in the construction process what those look like, but they can vent out to the back of the ADU here. We have a gutter, we have the 312 roof, and that's kind of it. The city has actually called out foundation size and details per structural plans. So they're saying, these details on the architectural drawings are superseded by the structural plans, which are obviously designed for seismic requirements, which is very important here in California. They've circled some of these details, like a minimum of 8 inches. So the concrete foundation needs to be at least 8 inches above grade throughout the entire foundation. So that was something that we had to deal with here, actually, because the neighbor's lot was a little bit higher than ours. And in order to get that 8 inches, we obviously couldn't dig down on the neighbor's side to get their lot lower. So we needed to build up our pad to make sure it was 8 inches above their lot. So that's an important detail. OC means on center, so 4 foot on center. They are talking about anchors that go into the foundation that hold the mud sill to the foundation. So another detail they've called out here. But this is a useful diagram of the sort of structural elements. We're beginning to get into some of the structural design. So now this is the survey. So this did not come from the architect. This came from the surveyor. And because we're building on the property line, it was obviously important for us to get a survey. And it was a requirement, actually, from the city to get a survey and to get the surveyor to come out after we demolished the existing structure to certify the forms to make sure that they're in the right place, that we're not sort of going into the neighbor's lot. So this came from the architect. It looks pretty similar to the site plan. It's got a few more things called out on it. And it's pretty cool seeing the surveyors work and how they do what they do, based off different landmarks or points of reference, monuments that are dotted around the neighborhood. The particular surveyor I used had done a decent amount of work in this particular area, so they already had some points of reference, and I think that helped them be very quick at what they were doing. But this is probably more useful to them than it is to me. But this, for example, they were actually comparing the existing fence to the actual property line. So that's kind of useful. That was pretty useful on this side. It's very close. Of course, one of the concerns about getting a surveyor is, what if they tell you that land that you thought was yours is actually your neighbor's? Maybe the property line is a few feet away from where you thought it was, and that could be pretty bad news. Really, the only way you'll find out is by getting the survey done. So thankfully, it didn't bring up any big surprises. But this is essentially the survey. So, called them out, got the survey. This was an important part of the submission to the city. And then they came out again, after the existing garage had been demolished, and they placed some markers. So as we made the forms, we knew we were putting them in the right place. So they put some markers to say, this is sort of, I forget how many feet, but it was maybe like 10 feet away from the property line. So you could then measure that and be sure that you're in the right place. Because when you demolish the existing structure, and certainly when you start to excavate, you can quickly lose your points of reference. And then they came back after the forms were set to certify that the forms were in the right place. And so then they sign off, give you a letter that you can then take to Oakland, to the city inspectors, and that's part of the process for getting the ready to pour sign from the city. So then you can actually pour that cement. The last thing you want to do is pour the cement before everything's signed off and find out that the forms weren't in the right place. So now we're moving on to Title 24. So this has a lot of detail, and I will be honest in saying that I didn't get into all the weeds here. I kind of trusted my Title 24 consultant, Edgar. He was super helpful. There were a few things that came up in the process. Like, for example, I realized that my architect had put sort of some of the wrong details about the windows in their plans that the Title 24 was working off. And so I had to get those revised. Thankfully, it didn't make a difference, but Edgar was able to revise that and sort of upload it to their system. So that was all good. It does talk about insulation and the sort of R factor that your insulation needs to be. So the inspectors will look at Title 24 and make sure that your insulation meets those requirements, possibly your HVAC, and then at the end, there's this inspection that the Title 24 consultant can do, or you can get someone else to do it, the HERS inspection. And so again, that is referencing a lot of the stuff that's on the Title 24. So I think I just included one page here because there's a lot of detail to the Title 24, but that's an important part of the submission. And I think we're now getting into some of the structural plans. So as I mentioned, my first step was actually to submit the architectural plans to the city, to zoning, to planning, to first of all get their sign off on that before investing a lot of extra money into the process. And then I got structural plans and I got Title 24 put together afterwards and submitted those. That may or may not work for you. If you don't have any concerns about whether the city is going to improve your plans in the first place, maybe it's pretty straightforward and you've got plenty of room around your property, maybe you'll just put everything together at once. And in some ways that might work better because you can have people work together as opposed to sort of piecemeal in series. So this is the first page of my structural plans. Again, it's talking about the footings. It's got these call-outs for different details. These are the rafters. You can see these are actually different to the architectural plans, 2x8s. I think we actually ended up changing those to 2x10s. But yeah, you've got call-outs for the strong walls here. So because there's this big span with the bifold, this big window that's not sort of structural, we had to put in these strong walls. It's a Simpson product. It's actually very expensive. You'll see them in later videos. About $1,000 each, very heavy, but they're sort of laminated wood that's very structurally strong. I guess that's why they're called strong walls. But those provide structural rigidity across this area to make up for the bifold. So then we start getting into a lot of the details around how some of these parts come together. And to be honest, this was the most confusing part of my plans that I didn't really understand to begin with. But as we got into the construction, it was my job to really understand these details. Certainly, it was the framer's job to understand these details as well. But frankly, I as the owner builder, it was more my job to make sure that they were doing everything to what was written here. And there were a few times where I actually realized that they weren't necessarily adhering to what we set out. So here you can see, the block wall connection to the framed wall, joist to wall, nailing. In many cases, a lot of these things weren't needed, but possibly useful to have. This next page is the strong wall. So the strong wall is a Simpson product. Engineers seem to love Simpson products. Of course, they're quite expensive, but they do provide nice documentation. So this page, comes from Simpson, I think. So it talks about all the different types of strong wall. These are different sizes of strong wall, the size of the anchor bolts that are required, and the weight that the weight of these walls. So they're pretty hefty walls. I think we had the 24 by 12, and the 24 by 10. So you can see these walls that one's 325 pounds. Pretty heavy, pretty bulky, require quite a few guys to get in place. And I definitely saw the framers struggle with those. We didn't have any kind of lifts or heavy machinery on site here. We're certainly quite tight on space here. So these were not easy to get in place. Of course, there was planning here where we had to make sure that the anchor bolts were in the right place. And these are special anchor bolts, threaded rod, pretty hefty, 1 inch diameter bolts, 1 inch diameter rod. So this took a bit of planning, kind of an important part of the construction. And then the last page that I've got here is the inspection card. So this was provided by the city. What I've done is I've put a star by all the things that I had to get inspected. So at first I really didn't understand this card or the flow, but as you get into it, you can certainly ask the inspector. A guy called Taylor helped me figure out this card pretty early on. And it kind of works from left to right. So I can just talk through all these different things. The UFA is the grounding. That's basically a grounding rod that is connected to the rebar in the foundation. So this is electrical. So we got the UFA, we got underground electrical, we've got underground plumbing. So the underground electrical is essentially the conduit that has the feeder, the service entry wire going through it. Underground plumbing, that is of course your sewer line, and all of those fixtures. We didn't run any of the hot or cold under the slab underground. That all runs through the walls. That is typically best practice because it's more accessible. You don't want to have to dig up your foundation to be fixing that stuff. And then you've got the building here. So we have the setback, the survey. So that's kind of the surveyor's job with the form inspections, special inspections reports, masonry walls. That was a CMU block wall, and then sort of foundation approved. So that's you're ready to pour. You pour the foundation, and then you can move on to the next phase, which is the first floor here. So again, underfloor electric. It's kind of what we did here already. Plumbing, maybe plumbing in the walls. Frame. So we've got the interior wiring, we've got the box makeup, smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, rough electrical. So that's kind of the overall electrical sign off. And then you've got plumbing. So this is the drainage, waste and venting piping. Our ADU is all electric, so there's no gas. We did have water piping. The tub, So we put the tub in, and we filled it with water, and we put the stopper in, and the inspector didn't even check that, but the goal was just to show that it's watertight. Of course, with a tub, they're generally, they should be watertight unless they're damaged. It's more applicable when there's maybe like a shower where you have a hot mop, or more waterproofing steps that go into that. So then, rough plumbing sign off. We had exhaust ducts for the extractor fan in the bathroom, the extractor fan in the kitchen, and the dryer. So that was another sign off. And then building, we had the roof framing, nailing, shear exterior. Some of that was also special inspections. Wall framing, insulation, and that all culminates in this okay to cover. So that is essentially where they say you're okay to start your drywalling. Because at that point you're going to cover up everything that's in the walls. They want to be sure that that's good. Tub and shower wall. So they wanted to see the hardy board that we put up, gypsum wallboard. So that again is the drywall. And then eventually you get to frame approved. And then you're kind of on the home stretch here. So this is the final inspection. So a lot of it was actually paperwork. They wanted to see the Cal Green document that I had to put together. They wanted to check Title 24. The HERS inspection was done. They wanted to check the smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors. And then you get to final. So there may be some things I missed here, but these things with the red stars are all the things that got signed off on my inspection card. So essentially you're going to have to work from left to right. You're going to have to sign off on all of the things here that are applicable. The inspectors will help guide you through it. That was certainly my experience. And then the first page is really just kind of an overview of the project, and special inspections here. We've got some other things here like the private sewer lateral certificate. And so I had a slight issue here in that my certificate expired just a day after the final inspection, although they'd been round and it actually had failed the final inspection a couple of weeks before. There were just a few tiny things that needed to be sorted out, and so I ended up having to get another private sewer lateral certification. The HERS verification that was done, the Cal Green. So this is just really special inspections, but the main meat of it is on this side here. So hopefully that gives you a pretty good overview of the plans for an ADU. Of course, every ADU is a little bit different, but here in Oakland, this was the plan set that I used and the process. And so with that, we can start getting into the actual build.